In the classic period of the film noir, in the 1940s and 50s, we see a succession of otherwise tough, good-looking, and street-savvy male protagonists taken in, used, and ultimately ended up dead or in death row because of a femme fatale. But in 1950s LA, a real-life case played out like a noir. It involved a beautiful woman, a murder, and a death sentence. But the juxtaposition? It was the woman who went to the gas chamber. This is the story of Barbara Graham. Hi and welcome back to the Historical Crimes and Criminals podcast. I'm Steve, your host. I've always been fascinated by Americana, particularly the first half of the 20th century. I find something wonderfully atmospheric in the novels and the films set in Los Angeles of the 1940s and 50s, and so I'm going to do a trilogy of true crime stories from the LA around this time. It's a big thank you to a listener of the podcast, Kodja Anderson, from New York, who wrote today's episode. If you enjoy this episode, you'll probably enjoy more of Kodja's work. You'll find a link to her Twitter page and her blog with other interesting stories on today's show notes. And I'm also informed that a podcast should be released soon. When it comes to beautiful women being charged with capital crimes, it becomes a newspaper man's dream story. The last woman hanged in the UK was Ruth Ellis. She was blonde and beautiful. Born in Wales in 1926 as Ruth Nielsen, she moved to London in 1941, entering the seedy world of nightclub hostessing. By 1950, she was also working in prostitution. In 1950, she married a client, dentist George Ellis. The marriage was unhappy. George was alcohol dependent and jealous. In 1951, Ruth gave birth to his daughter, but they separated soon afterwards. Ruth went back to prostitution. By 1953, she was a manager of a club in well-to-do Knightsbridge called the Little Club, where she met various celebrities. Through the club, she met David Blakey, a racing driver and former public schoolboy. He moved into Ellis's flat, although still engaged to another woman at the time. Their relationship continued over the following couple of years, with increasing physical violence present, and both parties continuing to see other people. In 1955, Blakey asked to marry Ellis, who was pregnant, but she suffered a miscarriage after he punched her in the stomach following an argument. Things came to a head on Easter Sunday 1955. Ellis went to the Magdala pub in Hampstead, where she saw Blakey's car outside. At 9:30 p.m, Blakey and his friend Clive emerged. Whilst looking for his car keys, Ellis emerged from the shadows, took out a .38 caliber Smith & Wesson revolver from her handbag and fired at Blakey. The first shot missed, and Blakey started to run round the car. Ellis fired a second shot, which hit, and Blakey collapsed to the pavement. Ellis then stood over his prostrate body and fired 3 more shots into him. Ellis then seemed dazed and said, "Will you call the police, Clive?" to Blakey's friend. The first police on the scene heard her say, "I'm guilty. I'm a little confused." She was charged with murder and in a sensational case that commenced at the Old Bailey in June 1955. She was asked, "When you fired the revolver at such close range, what did you intend?" Her answer, "It's obvious. When I shot him, I intended to kill him." The reply guaranteed a guilty verdict and a mandatory death sentence. Details of the tempestuous love affair were played out in the newspapers, and it brought sympathy from some members of the public and a clamour for the abolishment of the death sentence. But at 9 a.m. on the 13th of July 1955, Ruth Ellis, the last woman who'd be hanged in the UK, was executed at Holloway Prison. Barbara Elaine Ford was born in Oakland, California on the 26th of June 1923 to Hortense Ford, a teenage sex worker, and Joseph Woods. Hortense had another daughter, Claire, in 1925, and a son, Joseph, 5 years after. Joseph Woods Sr. died 2 months before Joseph Jr. was born. Hortense focused on Joseph and Claire, paying little attention to Barbara, who remained bitter to the end, telling a reporter that Hortense had never cared whether I lived or died, as long as I didn't bother her. Barbara ran away from home in December 1936. She was arrested the following month for vagrancy. A subsequent report drawn up by the Alameda County Juvenile Court in 1937 stated that Hortense's parenting skills were questionable, and she provided poor moral guidance to her teenage daughter. Barbara was sent to the Ventura State School for Girls, the same reform school that her mother previously had been sent to. Released in 1939, Barbara started attending business college. In the evenings, she started drinking in the Bay Area bars, meeting shipping clerk Harry Keelhammer. They married in 1940. 16-year-old Barbara lied about her age, saying she was 23. They had 2 children in rapid succession, both boys, but the marriage didn't last and they separated, the children remaining with their father. But the marriage hadn't dampened Barbara's errant behaviour. Barbara had been arrested for disorderly conduct in 1940 and for lewd and disorderly conduct in 1942. She was also arrested for vagrancy in 1941, 1943 and 1944. She had become a seagull, a derisive term used by sailors for the sex workers who flocked, working in pairs or groups on the California coast, targeting Navy yards. She married sailor Alois Puchel in San Diego in 1944. Puchel had been a regular client, but the marriage lasted all of 4 months. The beautiful Barbara lived in San Francisco in the mid to late 40s, working for a time in the Nob Hill brothel run by Sally Stanford, whose clients included Humphrey Bogart and Errol Flynn. Sally soon dismissed her, possibly because Barbara was involved with drugs. Years later, the San Francisco Chronicle revealed that she'd been arrested on narcotics charges, but released due to lack of evidence. Working as a shill in gambling joints, her life began to crumble. Barbara befriended drug abusers and small-time criminals. In 1947, she provided a false alibi in court for Mark Monroe and Thomas Sittler, who had been charged with assault with intent to commit robbery. Barbara was charged with perjury. She was sent to San Francisco County Jail for a year. Once released, Barbara moved to Nevada, working in a hospital and then as a cocktail waitress. She married auto parts salesman Charles Newman but soon tired of him, and she headed on a bus, going back to Los Angeles. After renting a room in Hollywood Boulevard, she returned to sex work, frequenting disreputable bars known as gin mills to chat up clients, and she met bartender Henry L. Graham along the way. They married in 1953 and had a son, Tommy. Harry Graham was a drug addict. It was he who introduced Barbara to heroin. The Grahams had something else in common. Both husband and wife had criminals for friends. Graham introduced Barbara to Emmett Perkins, a homely, middle-aged career criminal. And, in due course, Barbara and Perkins started a love affair. But Barbara was no happier with Graham than she'd been with any of her other husbands, and he also had a habit of helping himself to her drugs. She decided to leave Graham, and on her way out the front door, she reciprocated, taking both drugs and cash with her. She went to live with Perkins, leaving baby Tommy behind. Perkins quickly put her to work, frequenting gin mills to lure drunk men to his gambling parlour in seedy El Monte, California. It was here, in his grubby gambling den, that Perkins introduced Barbara to convicted felon Jack Santo. The men had murdered a grocer and his 3 small children in 1952. In early 1953, Perkins heard that a Las Vegas gambler had left a safe containing $100,000 with his former mother-in-law, an elderly widow. $100,000 is close to $1 million today. Perkins came up with a plan for a robbery, and they got together a gang. Drafting John Santo, Baxter Shorter, a safecracker, and John True, a former deep-sea diver. Barbara was asked in on the robbery, Perkins believing that a woman who lived alone was much more likely to open a door to another woman than a man. The gang drove to Burbank on the night of the 9th of March, where elderly widow Mabel Monaghan lived in a small house. Barbara rang the doorbell and asked if she could use the phone, saying she had car trouble. Mabel opened the door, and Barbara steps inside, followed by the men. Mabel, clearly terrified, began shrieking. An enraged Barbara hit her in the face with the butt of a handgun and pistol whipped the helpless old woman until blood pooled on the floor. On the morning of 11th of March, Mabel's gardener arrived at the house. He noticed that the front door was ajar, and the house appeared to have been ransacked. He then notified the police. Mabel Monaghan's body was found in a blood-splattered hallway, partly within a closet, hands bound behind her back. She'd been struck repeatedly on the head and strangled with a strip of cloth. The intruders had pulled up carpeting, emptying drawers, and thoroughly searched the house. The robbers had searched the house, leaving with virtually nothing, but they overlooked a handbag hidden in a closet, one containing jewellery worth $15,000, or $146,000 today. There had been no safe in the house. The story became a high-profile murder investigation. Mabel's daughter offered a $5,000 reward for information leading to the arrest of the person or persons who murdered her mother. And then, like all good film noirs, it started falling apart for the gang. The reward prompted an informant to name safecracker Baxter Shorter. Shorter was arrested. He made a statement on the 31st of March, providing the given names of the men and a description of Barbara. Everything fell into place after Shorter mentioned Emmett. Both he and Santo were convicted felons, well known to the Los Angeles Police Department. And the woman was almost certainly Perkins' girlfriend, Barbara Graham. Shorter's statement was leaked to the press on the 13th of April. The San Francisco Examiner reported that the police were making progress. And then Baxter Shorter disappeared. Baxter was last seen by his wife Olivia at his Los Angeles apartment on the 14th of April. He had vanished, seemingly, into thin air. John True, the deep sea diver, had been arrested, questioned, and released shortly after the Monaghan murder. The papers had referred to it, and he was frightened. Certainly frightened of going to prison, but even more so, with Shorter going missing, he was scared that he would be the next to disappear. John True struck a deal with the district attorney's office, promising to testify in exchange for immunity from prosecution. True's statement added significant and incriminating details to Shorter's account. He stated that when he came into the house, he saw Barbara striking Monaghan on the face and the head with a gun. True, shocked and frightened, grabbed her head in my lap. The others tied Monaghan's hands, put a pillowcase over her head, and dragged her body away. The district attorney decided to move fast, arranging him to testify before a grand jury in Los Angeles. Meanwhile, Barbara, Perkins and Santo were hopping from one low-rent district to another, all within California. Barbara would not admit they were trying to stay one step ahead of the law, preferring to say they moved around due to a guano deal. Guano is a bat and seabird excretant used as fertiliser. The trio were finally arrested on the 4th of May. They were found together in an apartment. The San Francisco Chronicle gleefully reported that all three were in various stages of undress when the police arrived. Barbara was in bed with Santo, her arms covered with puncture marks, and she had recently injected herself with heroin. Initially, Perkins and Santo were arrested on charges of kidnapping. Santo was accused of sending a telegram to Shorter's mum to make her believe that he was still alive. They were released and then promptly arrested on suspicion of participating in the Monaghan murder. Barbara was charged with passing $266 worth of bad checks. The press immediately became fascinated by Bloody Babs. Attractive, despite years of heroin addiction, Barbara underlined her femininity in court, wearing clothing that clung to every curve, high heels and red lipstick. Barbara continued to present herself to the world as she saw fit, languidly smoking cigarettes in court as she listened to testimony. Barbara enjoyed her 15 minutes of fame, cheerfully giving interviews, preying on the sympathies of journalists by sharing details of a miserable childhood. And she had the baby that she'd callously abandoned brought to see her. And somehow there was always a photographer around. Barbara was an ideal subject for media coverage. In the 1950s, Los Angeles' 5 daily newspapers, the Morning Examiner and the Times, the Evening Mirror, Herald Express and the Daily News were all fiercely competing for readers, and crime stories were always popular. And as a woman accused of murder in the course of a robbery, a man's crime, Barbara's case was particularly attention-getting. The Los Angeles Examiner and Los Angeles Herald Express were both owned by William Randolph Hearst, who reportedly favoured crime stories involving women, especially when embellished by slangy tags. As well as called Bloody Babs, Graham was also tagged as the Icy Blonde, with phrases like icy calm and stony attached to descriptions of her courtroom demeanour. The prosecution was uneasy that nothing definitively placed Barbara at the scene of the crime, so a decision was taken to entrap her before the trial began. The bisexual, sexually promiscuous Barbara was by now having an affair with fellow inmate Donna Prow, guilty of vehicular manslaughter. Eager for early release, Donna cooperated with law enforcement and she questioned Barbara about her alibi of the night of 9th of March. She had none, but Donna said a friend would provide one for $500. Donna's supposed friend was actually an undercover police officer named Sam Siriani. He visited Graham in jail on 3 occasions to plan the alibi. Siriani taped all of their conversations with a hidden recorder. They discussed the details of the alibi, that they spent the night together in a motel to make it convincing. Barbara made several incriminating statements during these conversations, including reference to Shorter. He's been done away with. Her need for the alibi. Without you as an alibi, I'm doomed to the gas chamber. The date and time of the murder. Early in the morning of March the 10th, rather than the evening of March the 9th. And the most damning, an admission that she'd been with True, Santo and Perkins when everything took place. Donna's sentence was reduced to time served and she was released from prison. Attempting to suborn perjury had invariably sealed Barbara's fate. When confronted what she'd done in court, Barbara became emotional, crying out, "Oh, have you ever been so desperate? Do you know what it means not to know what to do?" Barbara, Perkins and Santo were found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. Appeals were filed, but to no avail. Barbara Graham's last meal was a hot fudge sundae and a milkshake. And so, Barbara dressed herself for the last time on the morning of the 3rd of June 1955, choosing a light-coloured, form-fitting suit and brown court shoes. She'd been transferred to San Quentin State Prison the previous day, the only California prison with a gas chamber. A priest escorted her to the chamber. The executioner kindly advised her to take a good whiff after the cyanide pellets were dropped to hasten the inevitable. Barbara barked, "How the hell would you know, you silly rascal?" Her last words were, "Good people, always so sure they're right." Barbara Graham was a few weeks shy of her 32nd birthday on the day that she was executed. She was buried at Mount Olivet Catholic Cemetery in Marin County, California. In 1956, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Edward S. Montgomery contacted Hollywood producer Walter Wanger. Montgomery covered the Graham trial and believed her life story merited a feature-length film. Obsessed with the idea that Barbara was innocent, his passion prompted Wagner to hire him to write an outline. I Want to Live was released in November 1958. It was controversial from the start, viewed by social conservatives as an indictment against capital punishment, and yet the film received good reviews. Susan Hayward won an Oscar for her portrayal of Barbara. And what of Baxter Shorter? Emmett Perkins and Jack Santo are believed to have kidnapped Shorter, taking him to the San Jacinto Mountains about 100 miles away from Los Angeles, where they killed and buried him. His body has never been found, and he was declared legally dead 7 years later. Well, that's it for another episode of the Historical Crimes and Criminals podcast. I've been Steve. Thanks again to Kodja. Please check out her work on the show notes, and I'm going to be looking forward to subscribing to your podcast. If you have a story that you think would fit the Historical Crimes and Criminals podcast, please get in touch. And again, till next time, bye-bye.